Hello, hello, my dispatchers, my listeners. I'm your author, your narrator, your host, Scipio Eruditus. Today, I have the honor of being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, retired from the U.S. Army. And if you have been following my work, my coverage for any amount of time, I'm sure you've seen some of the stories that Mr. Aguilar has raised, some of the concerns that he has raised, and some of the really the crimes that he has witnessed in Gaza. And so, the topic of Gaza, what the U.S. has been a party to these last several years, and of course expanding now with this conflict in Iran, only intensifying. But I think it's very important that we had an eyewitness account of what's been unfolding here on the ground. And so, before we get a little bit too into the details of what occurred, right? I'd like you to just introduce yourself to the audience, right, and give us a little bit about your background, your expertise, right? Why were you selected or chosen, to go and distribute aid with the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, or the GHF, as we'll refer to it?
Yeah, so I served in the United States Army for 25 years. I was a West Point graduate, and then I served in the infantry, and then I went to Special Forces selection early in my career, and I spent the majority of my career, of my 25 career, as a Green Beret. I retired in March of 2025, just about 1 year ago, and soon after I retired, I received a phone call from a company called UG Solutions, which was a subcontractor under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And they were specifically hiring individuals that had a special operations background or a military background, a combat arms background, to deliver aid into Gaza under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And I was specifically recruited because of my background and my expertise in planning, in having deployed to numerous combat zones and being able to operate in an austere, hazardous environment. So that's why I was recruited. I was not seeking government work or paramilitary type work or any work of that nature that would take me overseas or into an area of danger. After 25 years of doing that, I was happy with my retirement, and it was not something that I was actively seeking. And then when I was called and offered this opportunity, I did see it as an opportunity. I did see it as a good cause, that we were going to be feeding starving people. I knew that at the time, regardless of politics or where anyone might fall from a perspective of religion or pro or anti, whichever side, that human beings were starving, no food was going in, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was going to be the mechanism, I assumed, to which that food would be delivered. So I wanted to be part of a solution to help. I wanted to be a contributor to what I thought was a moral and noble mission, and that's why I went. And I got a call on May 13th, and by May 15th, I was on a plane to Gaza.
I mean, that's a pretty fast spin up there. I mean, just a couple of days from being called and you're already in country. I
Yep.
mean, what was the onboarding process like? I mean, it seems within just a couple of days, it has to be fairly chaotic.
So I would say that there was no onboarding process. It seemed to me that they were specifically counting on and leveraging on the experience of the people that they had hired, to have the experience in knowing how to operate in an environment and being able to deploy with limited information and limited amount of time. I can understand that position they had, but that's a horrible position to take when you are bringing on numerous individuals, 300 contractors, who have never worked together, who have never operated together, planned together, have no previous working relationship, and you're putting them all together and you're sending them into a very um, the word I'm looking for, very
Precarious.
precarious, complex, hostile environment. And when you do that and you don't provide individuals training to work together, collective training, you have a lot of issues. But the other piece that I soon realized is that a lot of the contractors that they hired didn't necessarily have experience. Some of them had experience from serving in the military 10 to 20 years prior. One of the individuals that they hired was 71 years old. And his military experience prior to that was post-Vietnam. So a really hodgepodge group of folks they threw together. But we received no training, no onboarding, no weapons familiarization. In fact, they issued us weapons without qualification. We didn't qualify or demonstrate our ability to utilize the weapon that we were assigned. We received non-lethal munitions, stun grenades, tear gas, riot batons, uh, tear gas, stun grenades, things that
Yeah.
armament that I had never seen before, that we were issued that with no training or familiarization on how to use it. And the lack of that training directly led to the harming of civilians, but also put us all in danger.
And I think, just coming from a military background and, I'm a former Air Forceman myself. So, I deployed to Afghanistan just the one time, thankfully, nowhere near, as often as you, but I mean, there was so much training and so much, briefings involved. I mean, legal briefings, right? And obviously, if you're being handed lethal weaponry, you have to expect, to know how to use it, right? So the fact that you're just like throwing a hodgepodge of men together here, handing them all this lethal equipment and just being like, see you, all right, see you over in Israel. And this is just, I mean, how outside of the norm is this for these kinds of operations?
Well, I mean, it's unheard of. And to your point, not only did we not receive any onboarding or training, we received no legal briefings. We received no rules of engagement. We received no escalation of force measures. We were basically flown into Israel, given a slew of weapons and lethal ammunition. Not just riot type equipment or large group of people type of equipment that you would see in policing units, but lethal ammunition, machine guns, fully automatic rifles and carbines, pistols, lethal means of weaponry that we didn't qualify or train on. But in addition to that, again, no standard operating procedures were provided, no rules of engagement, no legal status. And what kind of shocked me is when we got into Israel, I expected that we would be processed through the embassy, or processed through some type of State Department representative or some type of government representative. And we would be processed with what I've seen in other situations, some type of a special purpose or special entry visa that would allow us to be there, not necessarily as long-term, like you would see in a resident visa, but a visa that provided us the authority to be operating in the way that we were. And none of that happened. We got off the plane in Tel Aviv at Ben Gurion Airport. We got off. We processed through by purchasing our own at the little kiosk. They have a kiosk there at the airport, a $25 online e-filed visa, a tourist visa. And that is how we entered Israel. And we conducted operations in Gaza under the legal status of being tourists.
Yeah, I mean, that's just stunning, right? I mean, if you are in a foreign country, I mean, there's all sorts of laws and there's all sorts of risk just for you as a company to have your employees sent into what it at the time is and still is, right? A war zone, despite the claims of a ceasefire. I mean, there's bombings, there's shootings, there's deaths every single day. So this is very much still like an active war zone in many ways. And to just send your employees with absolutely no legal training, no legal wherewithal, right, on a totally normal tourist visa. It is, yeah, it's honestly flabbergasting. It's still, even still hearing it now, I'm familiar with your story, but again, hearing it now, it's wild that something like this would even be allowed to occur. And I think this, before we get into it later, but just kind of, there's no way if people at the highest levels of the Israeli government were not in some way participating in the GHF and its creation, that they would be allowed this kind of access. Its employees would be allowed this kind of access without any kind of government intervention. So I'm sure we'll get into some of that a little bit later. But even now, right? Like this is all very bizarre. This is totally outside of the norm. And unless there was someone within the government who was party to this and basically signing off, right, and wanted to go around some of these alternative avenues, that's the only way something like this would ever occur.
Yes, there was absolute government involvement from Israel and the United States, absolutely, without question. And to the point that you made, yeah, Gaza is heavily restricted in terms of the ability to enter or exit. It's practically impossible because the entirety of Gaza is controlled through very specific entry and exit points. The Rafah crossing, which is a shared border with Egypt, is completely shut. And the only way into or out of Gaza are through these heavily controlled, militarily overwatched exit or entry points. You don't just stroll in and out of Gaza. You don't just stroll back and forth across the border through the gate like you're, crossing the border of the U.S. Mexico down in Juarez for daytime shopping in the South. You don't. They're highly controlled. Nothing goes in and out. But we were granted, as UG Solutions employees, granted this enormous flexibility in terms of just in and out, in and out, in and out of Gaza. In fact, we had a set of employees that were stuck on one of the distribution sites overnight because there was we were setting up equipment, and the equipment setup lasted longer than anticipated, so that they had to stay out there that night with the equipment to have it set up
Sure.
on the site. And in order, so we didn't have any food for them, so we ordered Domino's pizza in Beersheba and had it delivered from Israel into Gaza.
Wow.
So when you hear this whole thing about the restrictions and all this, that is because that is man-made, and that is a restriction that Israel has in place, that Israel enforces, not because it's just the nature of the conflict. And to your point, yes, there was heavy involvement from the Israeli government, from the U.S. government that involved in this operation. So the fact that there was such little oversight and such little consideration or care for the behavior and the authority of these contractors operating in Gaza, fully armed, that was not a mere oversight. That was intentional.
Yeah, and I mean, at the time, and in the aftermath of you coming forward, GHF denied a bunch of this, and the Israeli government denied this, right? Oh, we had nothing to do with them. But now it turns out in the aftermath, I mean, just what like a month before, the Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid was saying that the Israeli government had some hand in the GHF, and the prime minister's office came out and said, nope, absolutely not. And then a month later, Netanyahu's on Fox News with Bret Baier, and he says, "Yep, the United States and us here. Let me find the quote here. But he says, "Yeah, we have a plan that we devised with the help of American firms to separate the giving of the humanitarian aid to the population from Hamas control." And so he admits that this is a joint effort between forces in America, forces in the American government, and private interests as well, and then in Israel as well, right? So it's like there's been so many lies surrounding this, which I think is very important to contextualize, right, as we get into a little bit of your story and some of the pushback that GHF has given on your claims here. But so much of what you said has totally been vindicated, right? So it's they've been shown to be liars time and time again. I think it's now I certainly have my opinions on the matter, but yeah, but please continue, right? You're in country, right? I mean, this entire process is totally abnormal. You've been given no legal training, and what is like your first experience like of witnessing Gaza in the aftermath?
Well, when we first arrived into Israel, I had not been to Israel since the hostilities of post October 7th. I had been to Israel before in either training with the IDF or training with various Israeli agencies during my time in the military, but I had not been to Israel or to that area specifically, because I've also been deployed to Lebanon before, Egypt,
Hmm.
Jordan. I had not been to that specific region I until since October 7th. So when I got there, I noticed that things were obviously much different. But when we arrived in Israel the day that we arrived, as we were being taken to hotels to rest for the night before we would be starting getting you know, receiving our equipment and everything the next day in our preparation to go into Gaza. They took us to a location, and we didn't ask to go. It wasn't something that was, a requirement to understand Gaza. The IDF, who are our liaisons for this, which another indicator that the government was absolutely involved in this, because our liaisons were from the Mossad and Shin Bet, which is the Israeli intelligence apparatus. So absolutely government involvement. But they took us to this location. They took us to Sterdot. And if you look up Sterdot, you'll find that this area is just outside of Gaza in Israel, and it's on a very large hill, a tell in the Arabic language in this part of the world. Tell, like Tel Al Sultan or Tel Aviv, is hilltop.
Hmm.
So Tel Sterdot is a hilltop, and it overlooks Gaza. And as you're standing there on a clear day, you can see all of Gaza out to the Mediterranean, far, far south to the Egyptian border. You can see the towers in the background. So, because Gaza is not very big. So, as you're standing there looking, at this location, they have picnic tables, they have vending machines, they have um, food trucks, they have an area that's a scenic overlook where you can do a group photo with Gaza in the background. They have the binoculars like you would find on the Empire State Building, where you put in a coin and you can look through them and see closer. It's a tourist attraction specifically to look at and revel in this the bombing and the death and destruction being laid into Gaza. And when they took us there and they showed us this, and I thought, I was like, this is very dystopian. This is odd. So that was kind of my first experience, or my first exposure to the Israeli position that all Palestinians are Hamas. The war will not end until they are all dead. That's where I first learned about this idea of mowing the lawn. I don't know if that's something you've ever heard of, but
Yeah, no,
well,
this
they have
is
this
we've talked about that policy before, yeah.
first time I had heard about it. So when they explain this to us, that every now and then they go in and kill or hold back food or bombing, they called it mowing the lawn. And I just thought, I was like, this is really odd. So I kind of had that idea of that was the Israeli position. Now, my first day into Gaza was on the 24th of May. I went into Gaza with an IDF escort. We were being taken to these pre-built distribution sites to get eyes on, a reconnaissance, if you will, because no one had seen these
Yeah.
before. And I was part of the planning team, so I went in with them. And as we went to these sites, what immediately stood out to me was that the GHF had no say or involvement in the selection or the building of these sites. So what's interesting is that prior to the GHF being the solution for aid, when the UN and UNRWA were still operating before they were banned, there were over 400 24/7 ran sites, distribution sites, 400 throughout the entirety of Gaza, servicing 600 truckloads of aid coming into Gaza every single day. Not once a week, not once a month, not every few days, every day. And I knew that because I saw the UN map and I saw what the UN operation was, and I was expecting this pretty massive operation. And we went in and they took us to 3 sites, and I was like, okay, when are we going to see the other 397? And they were like, nope, that's it. We're only running 3 sites. And I was like, 3 sites. I was like, when the known requirement is 400 sites. I was like, well, how many trucks? I mean, it's going to be pretty hard to deliver that much aid, 600 trucks of aid every day through 3 sites. Oh no, we're not bringing in 600 trucks a day. We're bringing in 12 trucks a day. I was like, so the need is 400 distribution sites, medical assessments, vaccines, food, everything you would need for civil society to operate, fuel, gas, everything. And we're gonna cut it down to 3 sites with only 12 trucks a day in locations all the way in the far south. I was like, that doesn't seem like humanitarian aid distribution. And when I was actually on these sites, boots on the ground on these sites and looking at them, the IDF chose where they were going to be built, and they were built specifically within the ongoing combat operational zones, combat areas of Operation Gideon's Chariots, which is the offensive operation that Israel had launched into Gaza after October 7th. And what became clear to me at that point was that, okay, we're not here to operate as an independent, unilateral, neutral organization to provide aid. We are here operating as a component of the military operation. And what it seems to me is that we're running these distribution sites not to provide aid, but to provide a trap to set food to basically to the Palestinians, where all food is restricted, no food or aid, and basically to the Palestinians saying, you want food, you got to come south to get it. And it wasn't enough food to sustain the population. It was enough food as bait. Because as Palestinians would come south daily to these sites, they didn't get to go home. As they came to these sites to get aid, their homes were then bombed in the aftermath, and they were sent to UN encampments. And that was part of the plan. The plan was put the distribution sites in the far south, open the sites during specific times of the day, only one site at a time, not all of them at a time. So if you consider before this 400 distribution sites, 600 trucks being operated every day to sustain the population of Gaza down to nothing, then down to GHF operating with one site per day. These sites weren't set up to provide aid. They were set up as bait. And when I started connecting these dots, connecting the view of Israelis towards Palestinians, and then the aid distribution being set up in a way that to me was managed force displacement by deliberate design, I really started to question the motives and the intent of this operation and who was behind it.
Yeah, I know. It seems to me, at the very least, you and the other contractors were sort of used as like this fig leaf, right? To put this civilian veneer on what is very patently a government and military operation, as you've described here, right? Like this in no way is an actual humanitarian mission. This is a trap, right? I mean, the anyone who wanted aid would have to walk through like active bombing and war zones, which the entirety of Gaza is a free fire zone, and basically has been since October 7th, which, you know, I was, I was looking this up a couple weeks ago when, Tucker and Huckabee had their little interview, right? And, Huckabee was saying how the IDF, this is the most moral war we've ever seen. The IDF, they're so much more moral than the United States, Army. And it's just, I don't even know how these kinds of claims could be made, right? Like I was looking up, I could find no sourcing for either Fallujah or Sadr City for any like free fire zones being declared. I mean, I've been part of kill chains. I've been part of dropping ordnance within like, urban environments. And I mean, there are so many different guidelines we're constantly going through. If there are civilians, I mean, monitoring this thing 24/7, right? If there are civilians anywhere near, then we don't, we don't do it and we wait. And this happened all the time in
Yeah,
military
for Mike
operations.
Huckabee to say something like that is absurd.
Yeah.
I was in Fallujah, I was in Ramadi, I was in Mosul. Never did we have a free fire area, and never did we have carte blanche authority to just kill anyone. The rules of engagement were always very strict, and even in the most high intensity of conflict and combat, we had an obligation, a duty to protect and safeguard the civilian population, which we did. Did civilians die in these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? Yes. But it was, in my experience, in the units that I've been assigned to and the operations that I've conducted, there were always very strict rules of engagement. There were always very strict protocols to where, as you mentioned in the kill chain, to where if we know an enemy location and we want to strike with some type of aircraft or air to ground ordnance, and there was civilians or the casualty risk was too high, we didn't just do it anyway and say, "Oh, sorry, that's just war." We would not execute that target, and we would find another means to either interdict that target on the ground or wait until an opportunity to where the civilian collateral damage was at an absolute minimal to zero. So for Mike Huckabee to say that, someone who has never served, for him to say that is absurd.
Yeah, I heard it. I was like, this is so ludicrous, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's this has been my experience as well, right? Like this is not that accidents don't happen and not that, there isn't a loss of innocent lives, but the every experience that I've ever had, every measure was taken and often like to our detriment, right? Like in terms like militarily speaking, it was often in terms of, US forces detriment and many people got hurt because of the restraint that we showed. So it was yeah, I was quite stunned when he made that kind of comment. But as you are describing here, right? Like this is a it's not just that these people are having to go through, bombed out and being moved out of their current living location. So that too then can be bombed out. But I mean, this is through a free fire zone where anyone who moves, does not matter the age or gender, you are considered a terrorist and are considered free game.
That's right, everybody, and they will even the Israeli Defense Force, the Israeli forces will even identify young children as legitimate military targets. For example, if a young child is out trying to collect rainwater, imagine a child with a bucket collecting rainwater because there's no other means of fresh water. They live on an ocean. You can't drink ocean water. They have no ways to desalinate or purify that water. So their only means to actually collect water that they could then boil would be rainwater. And there's many instances in when children going to collect rainwater were shot, killed, either by snipers or by hellfires or by tank rounds, killed because it was considered an act of supporting the enemy to go out and get water.
It's really, I think, quite difficult for the average American to conceive of the level of barbarity that we've seen unleashed against the Gazan people. And as you mentioned, right, people, Israelis, your average citizen can go out and they can, pay a couple quarters and see, whatever the Israeli equivalent is, go and pay a couple shekels, right? And you can go see people get bombed and you can see people get murdered. You can have a falafel while you're doing it. And it is just, I know often a lot of blame is assigned to the Israeli government, but the government cannot do what it's doing without the support of the people to a certain extent. And as we've seen time and time again, the vast, it's not, monolithic, but the vast majority of the Israeli populace are very supportive of what's going on here. And even they take a sick leave. I mean, there is just so many social media posts throughout. So many of the most horrific crimes we've ever witnessed, honestly, in the 21st century have just been blithely posted on Israeli social media. It's quite stunning.
It is. And yeah, the various polls that are taken within Israel. I know that all polls and statistics have to be taken with a grain of salt when you're looking at them, but these are polls and statistics that come from Israel themselves in terms of the justification of this administration within Israel to continue this genocide, and that the overwhelming majority of Israelis support what is happening with the full wherewithal and knowledge of what is happening. It's in the high 80 percentile, 86,
Yeah.
87% of the population support not only what's going on, but how it's being done. So imagine if you have a poll of folks where you say, okay, October 7th happened and we have a right to defend ourselves. Do you agree with that? Sure, yes or no. But beyond that, then the question is, do you agree with or do you support the way that we're doing it? Genocide, killing children, destroying everything, displacing the population. Do you support that method of doing it? And 86 to 87% of the population say yes. So yeah, it's not just the Israeli military or the Israeli government acting as this monolithic force without authority. The Israeli population supports it for the most
Yeah.
part.
Again, yeah, it's very hard for us to kind of wrap our mind around this concept here in America, right? And I think particularly for people who've never served, and so many of our wars, right, have been, and at least over the last 20 years, it's been, an all volunteer military. It's mostly been like a lot of legacy, families, right? Like that's largely who even makes up the military at this point. I know that was the case for myself, right? I mean, I got ancestors going back to the Revolutionary War, who fought for America. So, we've come from a long line of, military men. And so at this point, right, like outside of a very small subset of America and those kind of military families, the impact of our wars were largely not fought. And that's not something you can say about Israel, where every single person, again, no matter the gender, right, women and men are all drafted into the IDF. So, they have in many ways participated in this. In many ways, they have like been a party to this, right? And so, there's a lot of very powerful psychological effects when you're living under this constant, I mean, both real and perceived, right? Real and perceived threats, 24/7. I mean, it really warps the mind. It really, forces you to dehumanize others. And we can't be too shocked, honestly, right? Given the kind of conduct and the kind of behavior that Israel has shown towards the Gazan people over the last 80 years. I mean, I don't know about your opinions on this, but I think at this point it's fairly obvious that at the very least, Israel allowed October 7th to happen to have the casus belli to go in and perform what they're doing now. I mean, as you were talking about before, Gaza is one of the most surveilled places on earth. It is basically an open air internment camp. I mean, digital, aerial. I mean, obviously on the ground, walls entirely surrounded. It's the idea that something like this would, occur for hours on end, and the IDF would not respond. I mean, I don't know your thoughts on that. I know
No,
I
I have come to believe that October 7th is not what it appears to be in terms of this very clean cut. They attacked us, we're attacking them. And that'll bring up another point that I observed when I was there, when we went to so gate 96 is the gate that Hamas allegedly breached and came through on October 7th, where the claims that all that it wasn't just Hamas, it was citizens, normal citizens coming through.
yeah,
And they took us to gate 96 to show us where this happened. And you look at this, the first of all, the border along that separates Gaza from Israel. It's not a barbed wire. It's not just, your property line fence in the middle of the nowhere, or just a line in the ground that says, oh, that's Israel, that's Gaza. The border that separates is a 60-foot tall industrial, mechanically built fence, much like the border that Donald Trump was building on the southern border. Steel, it's electrified. And I don't mean like you touch it and you get a little shock. I mean, you touch it and you die. No man's land created, at least 100 meters in front on both sides of it, with overwatching sectors of fire, surveillance, military units, all patrols up and down the strip where you can see the entirety of the borderline. This is not an area that it's just left to be in the hinterland, and whatever comes across the border, we just deal with. It is the most observed and surveilled place on the planet, or one of. And if you look at this, when they took us there, I'm looking at it and I'm like, how in the world did anyone breach this? It's not like you just come up to it. It's like you're coming up to a chain link fence and you're just like, oh, some wire cutters, and you come through a hole.
yep.
I looked at it. I was like, this would be impossible unless there was an intentional looking away. And do I think that the Israeli government and Mossad and Netanyahu were behind October 7th? Yes. And I don't mean did they send Israelis into Gaza to then do this attack and blame it on
Yeah.
Hamas? No, Hamas did execute this attack. However, in the months preceding October 7th, the intensity of the oppression, the cutting off of food, the continuous bombing got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then magically, here it is on October 7th. The gates are unmanned. No, people were told to stand down. Shifts were rotated to where people weren't guarding these locations. So if you're in Gaza and every day of your life you have the the boot of oppression stepping on your neck. And you see this day that, oh, the if you're in prison and the guard doesn't show up to the guard tower one day and you notice that, you're like, well, now's the time to try to get out. So when you look at it that way and you say, okay, but so I'm looking at gate 96 and I'm looking at the entire borderline and I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not how we were told this happened, because that couldn't happen. And then they took us to Kibbutz Be'eri. The kibbutz are these communal villages throughout Gaza or throughout Israel.
Hmm.
Many of them in the Negev, or the southern part of Israel. So in the northern part of Israel, you have Tel Aviv and Ashdod and Ashkelon, big cities. And then further in the central southern part of the Negev desert, you have these communal locations that they're called kibbutz or kibbutzim. And at Kibbutz Be'eri, which is just outside of Gate 96, right in the same area where the Nova Film Festival occurred, where you have these claims that initially came out to where babies were beheaded and babies were shoved in microwaves, all these things that were proven categorically false, did not
Yeah.
happen, not true. But this is where those claims were made that happened. And they took us there. They took us to Kibbutz Be'eri. And when you go into Kibbutz Be'eri, imagine coming into a gated community. And as you come into this gated community, this secured gated community, the side that was hit, that was attacked on October 7th, is still kept in the exact same way it was left on October 7th. It stays as a reminder to everyone of like, look what happened. And
Hmm.
when they took us to this site, I'm there, we're walking around the homes and I'm looking, and I couldn't help but notice, I was like, okay, Hamas was armed with AK-47s, maybe the occasional RPG. They didn't have heavy weaponry. They didn't have aircraft. They didn't have tanks. They didn't have missiles or ballistic missiles or heavy duty artillery.
It's a guerrilla army.
It's a guerrilla army that's ill-equipped, and they have small arms munition, maybe the occasional rocket, the 52 millimeter rocket that they get their hands on from, but they don't have heavy artillery and heavy armament. I'm looking at, and again, I spent 25 years in war around the world, and I know what certain things look like. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, that bullet pattern did not come from an AK-47. That bullet pattern on that wall through that home, into, not out through, but into, could have
Hmm.
only come from one thing and one thing only, based on the pattern of the bullets and the size of the holes, because of the way this weapon shoots. I was like, that can only come from a 30 millimeter chain gun. And there's only two things in the inventory of modern weaponry that use the 30 millimeter chain gun, and that is the Apache attack helicopter. That's what's equipped with it in its nose, that the chain gun that operates with the movement of the head of the pilot, and then on the
Hmm.
Bradley fighting vehicle. Well, we don't give the Bradley fighting vehicle to Israel, but we do give them Apache attack helicopters. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm like, these bullet holes coming into this area, that's not from Hamas.
Hmm.
So what, this doesn't make sense. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, and then they took us to the Nova Film Festival site. And obviously the bodies that were killed that day aren't there anymore. So you see the film festival, it wasn't like at a stadium or some kind of
Yeah.
built place. It was out in the middle of the desert. It was like Coachella, if you will. So when they took us there, but then the parking lot where all the cars were that were burned, I'm like, okay, well, I can see maybe they set fire to the cars, but the bullet holes in the top of these cars from above,
Hmm.
the hole that a Hellfire missile makes into a car is very
Distinctive.
inked. Or machine gun fire from above, unless Hamas was jumping up in the air with their with large artillery cannons and shooting into the
Yeah,
cars
indeed.
above. There's no way. I'm looking at them like this. All of these bullet holes came from above, and a lot of it, and Hellfire missiles, and as I'm walking around, I can even see the expenditure on the ground of, because when the 30 millimeter cannon on the Apache shoots, it's the brass casings fall, and
Yeah.
I'm looking at it and I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, well, this isn't an AK-47. And
Hmm.
this is not something Hamas has. So it really started
Yeah.
to raise a lot of questions about October 7th and what really happened. And was that just pretense to having a reason to go in and decimate the entire population. And what ultimately led me to leave, to resign, was the unequivocal proof, in my mind, the unequivocal proof of that premeditated plan that I saw shortly after we had been operating. But in June, I became aware of some plans that absolutely, for me, was my red line. I was like, I can't be a part of this anymore.
Yeah, please. I mean, go into that. I know we've talked before about the Hannibal Protocol, and I know there's been some independent analysis where you look at the death toll that day, and I think a very strong case can be made that the vast majority of the deaths that day were either legitimate military targets, IDF soldiers, cops, things of this sort, civil defense, and were killed of the civilians, right, that were killed that day was about half, right, of the total death toll. Uh, Two-thirds potentially killed by the IDF and the Hannibal Directive, which, for those unfamiliar, was a policy denied for a long time by the IDF and the Israeli government, but it's been confirmed numerous times now that they will intentionally kill their own soldiers, their own civilians, rather than allow them to get into Hamas's hands, because what they've seen time and time again is that, you kidnap one Israeli and you trade them for 10, 20, 30 Gazans or Palestinians. And so instead of having to do any kind of trade like that, they just kill them and then they blame it on Hamas. And that's
Yeah,
I believe what we saw.
The Hannibal Directive is something that is no longer conspiracy or something that is in the dark web where only certain people whisper of. The Hannibal Directive is real. It's something that is very much part of the IDF's standard operating procedures in responding to situations like this. To your point, to kill IDF soldiers or Israeli civilians rather than them having be kidnapped. It's a standing directive, the Hannibal Directive. But further to that point is that any Israeli over the age of 18 would be, in a conflict, a legitimate military target. When you consider Gaza is occupied by Israel. This is not a two-state where there's a war going on between two states. Gaza is occupied by Israel, by the IDF, and as the occupation, or as the occupied, I should say, even codified within the UN General Assembly and UN Resolution 3324, the Palestinians, the people of Gaza, have an absolute inherent right to resist their oppressor and to fight their oppressor, even if through armed struggle. So in that coincidence, if on one side Israel will say, well, anyone in Gaza is Hamas, they're all Hamas, even the children. Well, if that's the argument you want to make, well, then, to be fair, every Israeli over the age of 18 is a legitimate military target because of their conscription. Everyone over the age of 18 is in the military. So they're a soldier. So when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, well then when you take into consideration soldiers, gendarmerie, military force, law enforcement, and anyone over the age of 18 that was killed, well, that brings into question the legitimacy of the attack itself. Okay, well, it seems like it's not as evil and deplorable and bad as you try to make it to be. Was it still horrible? And should we condemn that type of violence? Absolutely. But to paint a picture of, oh, from the Israeli side of, oh, look, we're the victim, is not a genuine argument. It's very disingenuous, in fact. But to share the point of what really for me was my red line, to your point here, I started to ask myself about October 7th, and I started to ask myself, how did they attack across Gate 96 because that's the point. Gate 96 is where we went into and out of every day, going in and out of Gaza. And in order to even get to Gate 96, layers of military units, layers of checks, drones flying over, helicopters, military units patrolling. And then as soon as you get into Gaza on that side of it, the same thing on the other side, because Israel controls a pretty vast majority of the terrain. And people would say, oh, that's after October 7th. No, this was the way it was, period. Before October 7th, this is the way it was. So it made me, I was like, even other contractors there, how did these guys attack with paragliders and bolt cutters. If I was like, we like this doesn't make sense. And then
Beggars belief.
so um shortly after we began operations in Gaza with these sites, the IDF informed us that they were going to be preparing for the second phase of their offensive, Operation Gideon's Chariots 2, where they were going to assault into the north, into Gaza City, which we saw happen in leading up to the ceasefire in October, that they were going to clear Gaza City. And in doing so, one of the distribution sites that we had, they were going to take it. I mean, they built them anyway, but they were going to shut down the site for aid distribution and use it as an artillery position to support artillery for the ground movement into northern Gaza. So we had to, I guess we would say, hand this site over. So I had to go to a meeting in Beersheba, where the headquarters of the IDF Southern Command is located. IDF Southern Command has control of Gaza, everything south of Gaza City. So I went to this meeting, and we have the map of Gaza, and we're looking at, okay, well, here's the distribution site. Here's where you're going to set up. Okay, here's the timeline for us to get our stuff off for you to take over, because you don't want to lose security and control of this distribution site. So you have to have a security rotation. So we're planning all this out. And as we're doing it, I'm looking at the wall in this headquarters. This is an IDF headquarters, an Army headquarters. And I'm looking at the wall, and this map caught my eye that at first I was like not really paying attention to it, but we had like a lunch break, and I went up to look at it because it really caught my eye in terms of it was Gaza, but it was this phase plan, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and it laid out all of these phases. And this map, it was called Project Sunrise. And so it's like, what is that? I'd never heard of that. And so I'm looking at it, but it has Gaza broken down into phases of development and reconstruction to include condominiums, a Riviera, turning the Salah ad-Din Road, digging it out and making that the Ben Gurion Canal, and having a Riviera with high-end apartments and condos and golf courses. And there was even a part that had labeled the Elon Musk Industrial Trade Center. And I'm like, Elon Musk? I was like, what does Elon Musk have to do with Gaza? And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is so odd. And it was imagine, if you will, if you went to City Hall of your town, and you went to City Hall and you saw a phase plan for the redevelopment of your town, where they're going to put the golf course, the new City Hall, the new bowling center, the VFW, whatever. And
they got it all planned out.
Yeah, all planned out. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is June of 2025. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, they're really moving forward pretty quick with this whole idea of rebuilding Gaza, and the war's not even over. Like, we don't even know what I mean. And is that the plan is this what Palestinians want? Is this what the people of Gaza want? But what really caught my eye on this is I'm looking at it, this plan, Project Sunrise, and this phased real estate concept for Gaza. The date on it, the planning was done. This product was created in 2021. So as I'm looking at that, I'm like, 2021? Well, that predates October 7th, 2023 by a good couple years. And I looked at that, I'm like, we're not here to deliver aid as best as we can while also considering the constraints of military operations. We're not here only to be a part of the military operation, to be the forceful mechanism of displacement, to offer food to starving people. But we're here operating as a component to realize this plan, not peace, not a two-state solution, not a lasting negotiated settlement between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or a Gaza and an Israel. This is about money and real estate and power. And all of this was just pretense and precursor to take over the territory, to take over the land. And to me, that was my point where I was like, I'm done. And as soon as I left, what really started to make me question deeper was, why do they hate me so much? Why are they coming after me so hard? I'm a veteran. I served our country. I witnessed children being killed. And I'm simply pointing out the fact that there is a genocide. And the hate level, I was like, why? And I started to look into it more and more and more and started to realize that, okay, well, it's because the GHF, UG Solutions, front companies for the CIA to operate in Gaza. And I'm like, okay, a lot of people are getting very, very rich off of this. This has nothing to do with humanitarian aid. This is, and then what really kind of made me sit back and go, I knew it. I knew it, is when Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were having an
I was going
interview
to bring that up.
minutes,
Yep.
and Steve Witkoff is going off script and says, yeah, Jared here has been working on this for years. And what they were talking about, even by name in that interview, was Project Sunrise, the reconstruction of Gaza. And Steve Witkoff said, yeah, Jared's been working on this for, years before October 7th. And Jared Kushner kind of looks at him with this, like, you're not supposed to say that.
Yeah, you can see his face. He's like,
you can see his
what
face.
are you
You
doing?
can see his face. And it went off in my head. I'm like, what I saw is real. What I assessed or what I put together is the truth. And this is intolerable. We cannot, as a world and as a nation, stand by and watch a genocide in full definition or high definition, full motion video in front of our eyes every day on social media and the news and TV, and watching a genocide unfold before our eyes. And the purpose of it is a real estate development plan.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's it's one thing to kind of do the research and to kind of lay this out, and it's another thing to hear it from a firsthand witness. And this has been something that has really just been, I don't know, disturbing doesn't even, put like a fine enough point on it, right? You have people, these Hasbro and Israeli shills coming out and saying like, oh, there's no genocide, and you got people like Huckabee, right? This is the IDF's this is the most moral war that's ever been fought ever. Which you can just do like a cursory. You can look at the death toll from Sadr City and from Fallujah. I know it was only like a month in the case of Fallujah, it's a couple days, less than a month, but you can prorate that over 2 years in the same kind of conflict, and there's nowhere near the amount of civilian deaths in these American conflicts as what we've seen in Israel. And it's not just, human rights organizations in Israel making these claims or internationally. At this point, the ICC and the UN, independent UN investigative bodies, have deemed Gaza to be a genocide. I mean, if you just look up the legal definition of a genocide, and we
Yes.
discussed it here before, but 4 out of the 5 criteria, everything except for basically like forced intermarrying and forced interbreeding of Palestinian children. But even that still happens. There's still like a lot of kidnapping of Palestinian children, actually, and forcing them away from their parents and into Israeli homes. So
Yes.
honestly, this kind of 5 out of the 5, that last one's been going on, before October 7th, right? But I mean, we're looking at every single criteria of a genocide has been fulfilled here. The idea that anyone could even question that a genocide's going on here is honestly staggering, right? And you see
Well,
people
now
trying to,
the reality of the situation in terms of all the things that are happening are undeniable. But what
yeah,
you'll get the pushback on is, well, the key element of a genocide is intent. And we're not intending to do this. I'm like, oh, really? Let's take a look at Gaza and tell me that that's not intentional.
or just look at all the B-roll of all these Israeli politicians, including Netanyahu, talking about the Gazans being Amalek and how they need to be wiped out.
Exactly.
I mean, this kind of rhetoric is
When the
is
highest
standard.
members of your government, not just your lowly average Joe or average Jane, the highest levels of your government, Smotrich, the Ministry of Finance, Ben Gvir, the defense minister, Netanyahu, the prime minister, all of them talking about we'll be done when they're all dead, or that Palestinians are less than the value of dogs. Well, to me, that pretty clearly ties the intent to what's happening. Like, here's what's happening. If the only thing you're telling me is that it's, if I kill somebody, I killed them. There's it could have been involuntary manslaughter, it could have been crime of passion, it could have been negligence, it could have been an accident, it could have been premeditated, it could have been murder one, two, or three, whatever the case may be. But what's left at the end of the day is that I killed somebody, that person's dead. Then what's left to determine is, okay, the intent of what you did, but wrongdoing was still done. In this case, the destruction, the death, the displacement, the famine, all of these things are present. So in order that makes all of these things to characterize this as a genocide or this is not, is the intent. And when you tie the rhetoric of the government, the highest levels of government, and you see the result of what's happening, it's unquestionable. This is a genocide by definition and in execution.
Yeah, I mean, just for anyone who is like questioning this, what I've always brought up, right, is you can just go to Twitter and you can type in Gaza and you will see dead baby after dead baby after dead baby, people just maimed, destroyed. I mean, I know when the media was first coming in after the ceasefire, which they've still largely been, not allowed into Gaza, but as they were slowly starting to trickle in, and that was cut off, right? Because I mean, the scenes that have come out of Gaza are, I mean, you used the word dystopian earlier. I mean, apocalyptic, right? It's hard to imagine the
Apocalyptic,
level
yes.
of of urban destruction and just, I mean, every single facet area of civilized life, schools, hospitals, mosques, churches. I mean, you
Well,
name
I
it,
can tell you, being
everything.
being an infantry platoon leader in the early days of Operation Iraqi Freedom, that to drop even in the high intensity conflict, high intensity full scale war, to drop ordnance, an artillery round or a Hellfire or a joint delivered aerial munition from an Air Force bomber to 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 target a mosque or a school or a place that was not organically military use, you you basically had to go up to the president to get approved. And rarely did it get approved unless, and there were times where, if the enemy was fighting from a mosque. Did that happen? Yes, it did. But depending on the collateral damage associated to it, you either bypass that strong point, you bypass that location and continued fighting on, or you selected or you did a cordon and waited for either them to run out of ammunition or leave. You the the fact that you would just be given the authority to bomb a mosque or a school or a church or a hospital would be, anybody that says that the United States was just doing that in Iraq and Afghanistan is a liar, or hasn't been there. Because my God, the headaches that I had to deal with as an infantry platoon leader executing urban combat and being fired at from what you thought may have been the third floor of a hospital or the tower of a mosque, and not being able to do anything about it because of the sanctity of these locations in terms of their civilian use. And for anyone to say that we just bombed everything, I would say, no, that is not true, because you can go look at scenes of Fallujah and you will see mosques that still stand, hospitals that still stand, schools that still stand amidst the rubble. And was it destructive and violent? It absolutely was. But to think that it's okay that in war that there are no rules is ignorant, and anybody that says such has not experienced it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Fallujah is probably it's interesting. I didn't know that you served in Fallujah, but it is probably the most direct parallel we have in recent memory of like very intense, sustained urban combat. There's not been too many of these kinds of actions, in the last. I mean, probably the farthest you'd have to go back is like Vietnam or something, right? Hue City. It's been a very long time since we've seen like sustained urban combat operations. Fallujah is just like a small snippet of that. And again, nowhere near the level of just senseless violence. that we've seen coming out of Gaza. And I mean, we've covered some of the reports as well before of, international doctors coming in and saying, hey, like one day, everyone has a wound in their arm, or the next day they're shot in the head or in the leg or in the crotch. I mean, there's like these sick games going on. It's
Well,
psychotic, truly doesn't do it justice.
even coming home, having been a combat veteran, in self-reflecting, looking at it, and to your point, I have seen how the United States conducts war and the laws of armed conflict, the laws of land warfare, Geneva Convention, rules of war. But I think the closest that I could ever compare what I witnessed in Gaza to anything that I've witnessed in war prior would have been Raqqa, Syria. So when we were fighting in Syria against ISIS, Raqqa had undergone one of the heaviest bombardments that the United States had dropped ordnance on directly since Vietnam. And I mean some pretty serious ordnance. Raqqa was leveled. But even then, there were still remnants of civil society that remained. It was ISIS that, on their retreat from Raqqa, detonated and destroyed everything that stood so that it couldn't be used by U.S. forces or the Syrian Democratic Forces as a base or a place to mass forces to then continue the offensive into the Euphrates River Valley. So they destroyed the place. They leveled the place. And as we went through Raqqa in the pursuit of ISIS, I had never in my life seen anything to that level of destruction, absolute destruction. And the day that I drove into Gaza on the 24th of May at about 10:30 in the morning, and we drove through Rafah, which is the city in southern Gaza, and everything from mosques, schools, hospitals, playgrounds, churches as well. There are Christians in Gaza,
Yep.
leveled, destroyed, and then driving through these neighborhoods where there were no streets left anymore because everything had been destroyed. There were paths, basically trails that Israeli bulldozers made to get through the rubble. But there's no roads or city blocks or streets anymore. There's nothing left. And people look at Gaza now and they think, oh, well, it's a third world country. It's always been that way. No, go back and look at the photos before the bombardment. You see city blocks and cities and street lights and stop signs and bus stops like you would anywhere else in the United States. And you look at that now and it's gone because it's been bombed to oblivion. And as we were driving through Rafah, we had stopped at a point because we were driving, we were in these armored vehicles, and from experience that armored vehicles are loud and but as we're driving, we're waiting behind these bulldozers to clear a path to get through Rafah. And as we're doing so, and we stop, you turn off the engine because you're sitting there for, a couple hours. And I'm sitting there and, I open the door and I'm just kind of sitting there waiting, just in the quiet. And you can hear the faint cries and the moans of people that are buried in this rubble, crying out that no way to rescue them, no way to get to them. And you then realize that in all of these buildings that have been destroyed and bombed, nobody got out. They didn't retreat or evacuate and then bomb. They bombed people as they were sitting in their living room eating dinner. And when you look at this and you see that level of destruction, you then realize that this is not, this is long since departed from just war in terms of proportionality, in terms of military necessity, in terms of having the intent of war is to capitulate one to your political will, not to destroy them into oblivion. This is not a war. It is a genocide.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the issues whenever we talk about the death toll, the numbers that we've, been given from the Gaza Health Ministry are, I mean, you can like look up their, methodology. They're very conservative. If they don't have a body if they don't have a body, then they will not declare them dead. So as you pointed out, I mean, there's so much rubble. I mean, just an insane amount of urban destruction. None of that's been picked through. I mean, Gaza is still largely in the state that it's been over the past. I mean, it's destroyed, right? So just increasingly so over the past couple of years. So no one's gone in. There's been no removal of rubble. I mean, I've heard some estimates say that it would take 30 years. Now, of course, if they want to get it done quicker, they'll get it done quicker. But I mean, we're talking about like decades worth of work here that needs to be done. They're going to be picking out bodies from the rubble in Gaza for years to come. I mean, the idea that
Yes.
only 70,000 people died from this kind of just, again, totally no holds barred destruction is 70,000 is like bare minimum. It's very
Well,
easily.
having seen conflict in all throughout Iraq and Afghanistan, and seeing like Fallujah, the death count, Mosul, the death count, Sadr City, the death count. Going back, years later after my time in Mosul in 2005 and 6, I was back in Mosul 2018, 19 when we were fighting ISIS and laid waste to the entire city and the death toll there. And having seen the war at this scale, that my assessment, just based on the sorry, I'm back. I had to
Yep.
drop a call. But the level of destruction and the amount of death, I would assess, if as a military planner, if someone said, "Hey, here's the population of this region, here's the level of destruction, here's how long this war has been going on, what would you assess the death toll to be?" I think it's well within close to 500,000, because there are thousands buried in the rubble. There are thousands, because remember this: one of the munitions that we provide directly to Israel is the Mark 84 Joint Deployed Aerial Munition um, um, thermobaric bomb. It's a
Hmm.
2,000-pound thermobaric munition. This
Yeah,
is
the
not
J
a
Dam.
munition that they say, "Oh, well, you need it a JDAM." That, "Oh, you need it for a bunker." No, this munition doesn't explode on the ground or go deep into the ground and explode. It actually explodes above the ground because it has a thermobaric cloud that eviscerates everything in the area of its destructive force. So, what about those bodies of which there will never be a body found? What about those deaths? What about the deaths that are buried under rubble that won't be found for years from now as they clear rubble? What about the deaths that have been buried in shallow graves that we know Israeli forces have buried thousands in the ground in shallow graves? So, yeah, the 70,000, like you said, that's when they have a body. There's a lot of dead to which there's no body yet to account for, and in some cases, there never will be a body.
Yeah, and I mean that 500,000 figure would track with, you look at the population of Gaza before the war, it was like a little bit north of 2.2 million.
Yep,
And now, by some estimates, there's either 1.5 or 1.7 million people living in Gaza. So that perfect. Now, that whole 500 to 700,000, a lot of people have left, they've fled, right? So it's like not all of those people
sure.
necessarily are dead, but I would say, yeah, vast majority of those hundreds of thousands who we'll never know.
Yeah, I would say that if you look at the number of human beings that have been allowed to leave, that number is very small.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's another good point as well. This has all been tightly
Not
monitored, and
like
there's
they opened the borders and said everybody leave, and you saw mass exodus like you're watching Israelis leave Israel now. No, it was very, very restricted on who could leave. And in fact, very, very, very few Palestinians got out of Gaza. And those that did were those that had a lot of money and a lot of connections.
yeah, no, it's man, it's always upsetting talking about this stuff. I think particularly as someone who, has served in the military and has an understanding of how these things have operated, how they should operate, and seeing what's unfolded here, I have a very hard time having any charity with anyone at this point, right? Who continues to deny what's going on here. I mean, you are either so ignorant, like dangerously ignorant, that you shouldn't be talking about these kinds of issues, or you're just a liar. And I don't know how there is any kind of middle ground at this point. There's literally so much information. It's one you could go through the information on social media for years at this point, right?
Well,
Years
I
have
can
been
tell you,
documented.
I often, if when someone confronts me about the veracity of what I witnessed, I say, okay, well, who's telling you it didn't happen? Oh, well, somebody that I know, from somebody that I talked to, from somebody that said they knew somebody that knew somebody from the IDF. Oh, that's your source? Okay, well, um, the people that are telling you that it has happened are me, someone that was there, who has a career in the military, that knows what I'm talking about. You have doctors, surgeons that served in Nasser Hospital or Beit Hanun Hospital that witnessed the exact same thing. You have aid workers from various countries around the world, not just the United States, but European nations that worked there in the UN that have the same testimony of the bombing and the indiscriminate shooting. But then you also have the IDF. There are people within the IDF who have since come out and said, yes, we did that. We use snipers to shoot children outside of these distribution sites. We openly fired at the population because our commanders told us to. So in my place, it's like, okay, you have the person that was there, others that were there, doctors, surgeons, aid workers, and the IDF themselves, the ones that we are saying that did it to say, yes, we did it. And your position is that it didn't happen. You are either dangerously ignorant, as you said, well said, or you're lying.
Yeah, no, it is again at this point, right? There's so much evidence that's come forward. I know that's one of the charges, the defenses that's often brought forward. It's like, oh, well, if this was really as terrible as you say, then there'd be people coming forward and saying something. Well, they have, right? There have been plenty of people who've come forward, increasingly so in Israel, right? Because the reality is that, doing these kinds of things to other human beings is bad for your soul. Okay. It's bad for your soul to murder innocent people. And there's only so much that a human can do of that before they either become just their conscience is seared as like a hot iron, as the scriptures say, or that it breaks them. And I mean, there have been, several at this point, suicides of Israeli soldiers, taking their life on camera on social media. I mean, there's
Yes.
the aftermath. I mean, I know I'm sure have plenty of friends you can attest to this, right? The aftermath of what war does to someone, right? And the long-term psychological effects of 20 years of, the so-called war on terror has had on, the American soldier and the American military. It's the often unaccounted cost of war. And so we're going to be seeing the psychological effects of what's going on in Israel for some time here. But I know that's one of the other things I wanted to address, right? Is like when you first came forward and you were bringing some of these concerns forward, right, to the chain of command and what have you. First of all, what was the response of those within the organization? And then, afterwards, right, when this really, I mean, media campaign was organized against you.
Well, the I soon came to realize that the media campaign organized against me was largely, I guess, orchestrated, if you will, by the CIA. It's very clear to me. Well, it's not only clear to me. I know that while we were there, so operatives within the CIA, agents,
Yeah.
CIA agents, they call them blue badgers. They carry a blue badge. Their credentials. I'm CIA. It's not like Jason Bourne where they're, walking around with 18 different aliases and, Treadstone this and, they're agents. They're like any other federal agency for the most part. They do have special activities, but for the most part, they're not. And while we were there setting up operations, there were blue badge carrying CIA agents as part of the GHF because they were conducting intelligence collection. That's a fact. They were conducting biometric intelligence data collection. They were collecting data on the entire population. They were doing intelligence operations in coordination with Israel. That's a fact. So when all of their, I guess their smearing of me was like, oh, well, he didn't quit. We fired him. Okay, well, sure. I mean, like I'm not going to get down to the weeds of the argument with you. Here's my resignation letter that I submitted to you that I resigned. Here's your letter to me acknowledging that I resigned and agreeing to pay me my amount of duty pay up until the day that I resigned. So, okay. But regardless of whether I resigned or you fired me, doesn't change the fact of what's been seen and that there's a genocide. And last time I checked, when you're looking into the annals of history, it says, oh, well, it was a genocide, but it doesn't count because the person that called it out was fired by the organization that he said was doing a genocide. Okay, well, it doesn't matter whether you fired me or I quit. Doesn't matter. Red herring argument. And then
Yep.
it's oh
Yeah,
well,
it's fallacious.
he was a disgruntled employee. At the end, towards my point of resigning, I was disgruntled because genocide disgruntles me. Watching children get murdered and women get murdered and family members and starving people get murdered and gunned down, and an organization does nothing about it but turn their head and look the other way. That does disgruntle me. I would say that I was that I was disgruntled, which is why I resigned.
Yeah.
But then they say things, oh, like, well, he didn't see what he says. There's video and pictures, every bit of what I have testified to, because there's so much more. But every single thing that I have testified to is accompanied by either video or photos that I took. It's not something on the internet or something that's AI or something that someone else had and I saw it and I'm like, oh, look, you see that? It's videos and pictures that came from my phone on the location on the site, metadata back to, so, and this has all been proven. So when you look at it, it's like, okay, so did it happen? Yes. Okay, so why are you pushing back on it? Well, because you were a bad employee. Okay,
Yeah, I mean, the motivations matter not a whit, right? I mean, you could have
yeah,
the worst motivations ever, but it doesn't really change the fact of the information. It's like
yeah. I
none
mean,
of
it
the
doesn't. Yeah,
yeah,
and
none of
my
the
motivations weren't necessarily, they want to paint this picture of, oh, well, he needed this job and this and that, and was like, I served for 25 years and I am retired with a full pension. I don't need a job.
yeah,
So
yeah,
all of their arguments, it's just like, okay, well, it all you can if all of the smearing you're levying against me, even if it were true, okay, it doesn't change the fact that you're complicit in a genocide, which is a war crime. So go ahead and attack me all day long. It doesn't change. It's like if I witness a murder, someone shot somebody and it's on camera. And in the shooting of the person was like, I meant to kill you. And you're like, hey, I think this person meant to kill that person. Here's the video. And in court, the response is, oh, that person's a bad driver. I might be a bad driver. It doesn't change the fact that you murdered somebody. Like,
yeah, indeed. No, they're terrible arguments, honestly. And one of the things is you discussed, right, that intelligence agencies are working to drive these media narratives, and this is something that not just I have testified to, right? I mean, we've covered this subject ad nauseum, but specifically for the Mossad, right, and some of the pushback that we've seen here. I mean, Viktor Ostrovsky, he's a former Mossad agent. I don't know if you've ever read his book By Way of Deception, but I mean, he covers a bunch of this, right, and how the Mossad would work with Jewish organizations and they would organize these smear campaigns and call people like you've been called, right? Oh, he's an anti-Semite, he just hates Jews. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But before you went to Israel, I mean, you were generally generally not a Zionist per se, right? But you were supportive of the Israeli position, right? You're like, yeah, they got a right to defend
prior
themselves,
to
essentially.
prior to getting off of the plane in Israel, if you were to ask me where do you fall on one side, I would consider myself to have been a conservative, MAGA, pro-Israel. They have the right to defend themselves. Hamas is bad. This war is justified.
Yep. Yeah, and I know that's one of the things, when I was first really learning about this issue, right? And trying, having to disabuse myself of so much of the misinformation that's been fed to me, right? It's, I brought this up just a couple days ago in different discussions, but it's, one man's stories sounds true until you hear the other side. And when so much of us in America, we've only ever heard the one side. We've only ever heard, oh, these people are all terrorists. They all just want to kill us. They're cutting off the heads of babies. Meanwhile, there's absolutely no proof for
Yeah,
any
and
of
that
that.
that all of that Hasbara, like when after October 7th, and you saw all that was coming out, I believe that. I would have no reason not to. Israel, I was always told that Israel was one of our greatest allies.
It's our greatest
Israel
allies.
is the most moral army in the planet, and all of these things. And I saw it, and I was like, yeah, horrible. Oh my God! And looking at it too, and I even saw it like when they took us to Kibbutz Be'eri and they took us into the kitchen of where they said this happened. This is where that happened. And I'm looking at it, and I even against all of the evidence presented to me there, I'm like, well, this doesn't even look like the pictures. Is there a different but this isn't making sense. Even then, I was still like, well, they said it, so I mean, I guess I don't want to say it didn't happen because I don't want to be offensive. Well, no, the,
Yeah.
the truth is that it didn't happen, and the truth is that there are a lot of lies, and the truth is that the weapon or the assault against the truth is, well, you're an anti-Semite, or you hate Jews, or you deny the Holocaust. I mean, I've heard it all, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, whatever.
Yep. Well, I mean, really the only thing they have, right? Is that they will call you an anti-Semite, but very rarely will they ever call you a liar. You
It's a great point. Yeah, you're an anti-Semite. You hate it. Okay, well, that's not true. Regardless,
Yeah,
that doesn't change this this aspect of what the and again, if I had come home from there and there was no videos, no pictures, and no one else had ever said this, then I could see there'd be a lot of scrutiny against like, I don't think, kind of shady. Thousands of people have said the same thing I have said, and it's not people that I know that we've corroborated our stories.
yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons why, just kind of putting this all together, and after our discussion here, I think one of the reasons why you got such the amount of pushback that you did is that you were lifting up the veil, lifting up the skirt on agency operations. And, this is a subject we've covered quite a bit, but NGOs historically have been used by intelligence agencies as
Yes,
cutouts, right? They're the civilian kind of veneer
right.
that they put on their operations. And it was quite fascinating as I was doing research for this interview, but I was looking up, some stories on the GHF, and there were drugs found in some of their aid shipments,
Mhm.
and the Palestinian authorities thought that the drugs were being used basically as a tool against trying to dict the population. Certainly that could be possible, right? But
Yes.
when we think back to historically the CIA and some of their practices throughout history, transferring drugs internationally in these kinds of shipments. I mean, obviously Vietnam very famously being shipped back in the caskets, right? I mean, who's going to look in the casket of a dead American soldier? Who's going to look in a bag of flour for food for a bunch of starving people? You're just going to be like, oh, yep, go on through. I mean, these are perfect ways to to launder and to traffic these kinds of things, and then to fund further black operations. So yeah, I think that was quite fascinating, getting some
Really interesting
confirmation
to me
there.
that kind of made it a no-brainer for me is that the um, UG Solutions is owned by a former special forces soldier, not an officer, but a special forces soldier who then went to go work for the CIA. Safe Reach Solutions, the parent company to UG Solutions, is owned by Phil Riley, who is a 30-year CIA operative and director of the Special Operations Division of the CIA. Jennifer Counter, who is the operations director of the GHF, is a career CIA covert case officer who, during her fellowship in the agency, was working with the State Department, who wrote a report provided back to the CIA to say that in the future, when we're no longer fighting these overt wars and we no longer have wartime authority, it would be best if we work with or work through aid agencies to be able to collect intel. This is that. This is exactly that. So, yes, this is their new approach to, and the thing is, if you look at it, USAID being shut down is a tool of that because shut down USAID, start all of these private aid agencies like the GHF and others. Well, then you can own them and infiltrate them with the CIA and other intelligence operatives, and they're not under the control of any state or governance. It's a If you look at it from a perspective of a plan to do this, it's perfect.
Yeah, no, this is one of the things that we called out, right, with the Trump administration, shuttering USAID. Well, it's like so much of this money is not just disappearing; it's just moving into the private sector with absolutely no oversight. Not that USAID had much oversight to begin with. So it's like both are bad situations, but one is being sold to you, right? Like, oh, we're downsizing the government, we're getting rid of this foreign aid. Well, I mean, that's not true, right? We're still spending just as much on foreign aid. Instead of now going through government agencies, you have plausible deniability, and you can
We're
send
we're
it
spending
through
even
private
we're actually
organizations.
spending even more,
Yeah,
and it's going to areas where there's no oversight and there's no control or responsibility or auditing of where it goes because now instead of spending it on the aid, you can funnel it to black activities. It's perfect.
and I know GHF they shut down November last year after receiving some $30 million from the U.S. government. They claimed that they had sent out 187 million meals. I have no idea
So,
how that's even possible on $30 million, frankly.
well, I'll tell you exactly how it's possible because this was something that I looked into as well, and I have the receipts, as the kids say these days. But I was
Yeah.
so the 180 million meals they say. Here's where you break down the math of that over 16 over 8 months, or excuse me, 6 months, so about 187 days of these, and they say this is how many meals. Well, if you look at each box of aid that the GHF had in one box, it was that allegedly that box could feed 5 people for 3.5 days. So if you take 3 meals, 5 people, 3 meals for
Mm,
3.5 days. So if you do that math, that's 52
yeah.
per box. So if you take out all the food from that box, you open that box and you take everything out and you count every calorie and you divide it by 52, well, that's 200 calories per meal. So even if you were getting 3 meals a day of that food, making 3 meals from it, and remember, we weren't giving them food or meals. We were giving them boxes of rice or flour or pasta, just boxes of dried food goods. We weren't giving them
Yeah.
food or meals. And in that, okay, so if that person got their 3 meals a day, that's 600 calories a day. Well, GHF was the only aid operation operating in Gaza. So if they had 180 million meals over 189 days for a population of that they were supposed to be working towards 2 to 2.1 million for 3 meals a day every day. Well, if you surely break down that math and take that math, that's for everybody in Gaza, you're getting 1 meal every third day. You're getting 200 calories every third day. And in order to get that, you have to walk 8 to 10 kilometers to get it. It's designed famine. But when we were there and we were delivering these boxes, I noticed that some of the boxes were old, and some of the boxes, when we would set them in place, had holes eaten in them. You know, like when a rat eats through
Mm,
something, you could see
yeah.
the hole. Things that had been eaten through by rats, things that had been pilfered, boxes that had been, the sides had been cut open, and things had been taken out. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, if this is our aid that we're buying, how is this happening? And so I asked the people in charge, and they're like, "Oh, we don't know where it comes from." And I'm like, "But aren't we buying it?" We don't know. And I'm like,
Mm.
there's not a lot of layers to this organization. It's like it's us and then GHF. Like we're it. There is no, so like if we don't know, who knows? So one day, I one of our aid trucks that we would bring in, that we would take to a site, unload it, and the truck would drive off. Well, I decided one day I was going to follow this truck. So I followed it back to it where it came from, this magical place, and it was the port of Ashdod, which is in Israel, where international aid comes in, and all the aid that was still coming in for the UN and UNRWA that was no longer allowed to be taken into Gaza, but was still coming in from international donors, would be taken off these ships, put in a warehouse, and just left there. And the GHF would come in, take from that, and then take a GHF sticker, a black sticker that said GHF, put it on the box, and then boom, that became GHF aid. So the GHF wasn't actually buying any of the food. So what happened to that $30 million grant that US State Department funneled to the GHF? What happened to that money? It wasn't spent on food.
Well, that's very interesting indeed. Yeah, as I was looking this up, I was like, there's no way that you could feed that amount of people on $30 million, not including, I mean, you just talked about, right? Hundreds of employees. I mean,
Yeah, you got
they're
to
all
pay
getting,
employees. You got to buy fuel for the trucks. You got to buy maintenance. You got, that, yeah, that money, not a dime of it went to anything in aid. And what was interesting to me is that when I soon after I returned and I blew the whistle, I was contacted by the Office of the Inspector General for the U.S. State Department, and they
mm,
asked if they could talk to me about if I knew what happened to the money. I was like,
mm.
we're the ones that gave it to them. What do you mean asking me what happened to the money? I don't know. And they're like, yeah, well, the State Department, the Office of the Inspector General of the State Department, we're a separate entity, so we're doing our accounting, we're oversight, and we're looking at the process of which this was approved, and it went through approval lightning fast, and missed the mark on every bit of approval. It's like if you go to get your vehicle inspected and every single thing on your vehicle fails inspection, and the guy just gives you your sticker and say, "Here you go, go renew your registration." It's like, so yeah, every check and balance on this approval for this grant money failed, but they still got the money. And now nobody knows where it went. Well, I can tell you the reason it went through that way is because it was for the agency through some kind of black op. And the reason they can't account for it is because the agency spent it on spy material.
Yep. Indeed, this is the reality of black operations and intelligence operations. Fascinating conversation. Definitely went down some avenues I didn't think we'd be going down, but yeah, very fascinating. As we draw this to a close, if you had any closing thoughts, just really what, if you could tell the audience, the American people, really one thing, what would that be?
Continue to seek the truth. And again, don't take my word for what I'm telling you. Go out and look. See the videos, see the pictures, see the testimony, see multiple testimonies. The testimony you'll hear from doctors, IDF personnel themselves confessing out of guilt. We didn't all get together and corroborate our stories. We all saw the same thing. So the people that are saying, no, this is a lie, or no, that didn't happen, are people that have a vested interest in making a lot of money or hiding the fact that war crimes were committed. Well, the people that are coming out and speaking out have everything to lose and nothing to gain. I gain nothing from this. I'm not paid by somebody. I don't get paid by spokespeople to spread this. I get paid by no one. No one sponsors me. No one pays me. I'm not monetized. So think about the people that are speaking out, and then think about the people that are speaking against it. And then ask yourself, what side of humanity, what side of history do you want to be on? But then the implications of how it's impacting us here at home. I would much rather have those billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in bombs that drop on Gaza be spent here for Americans, for education and healthcare, and better pay for our teachers, and better pay for our firefighters, and better pay for our law enforcement than being spent for Israel.
Couldn't agree more, sir. Yeah, just once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for, I know trudging this stuff up is never fun, but it's you have an important story to tell. So I'm very glad you joined us
I
today
appreciate
and
the
shared
opportunity.
that.
It
So
was a great conversation. Thank you.
yeah, thank you, sir. So I know you have a YouTube channel and some other social media, so definitely go ahead and plug those. And you're running
Okay.
for
Yeah.
office as well in North
Yeah.
Carolina.
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm on X, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram. All of those are associated to Anthony Aguilar official, or if you type in my name and you see my photo, you'll know it's me. They're all verified accounts. And then I'm also running about a month and a half ago, I decided that I can no longer just be a bystander. So I am running for Congress here in the US Congress District 13 in North Carolina. I'm looking to unseat the incumbent, who receives a lot of money from AIPAC and who is an Israel first congressman. So I'm looking to unseat him. So I'm running for Congress 2026. And you can find me at aguilarforuscongress.com, www.aguilarforuscongress.com. And on there, you can find my platform, ways to help, various ways to help. The biggest way to help, donations are great, volunteering is great. The biggest way to help is spreading the word amongst the nation, and getting the word out that there's candidates that are running that want to go to office and not be bought.
Yeah, no, I will definitely include the links for that in the show notes. People can go out and check, some more of your work, some more of your testimony and your positions on, things. And yeah, no, we definitely need more politicians. We're not going to be in APAC's pocket. So
Anyone's
yeah,
pocket,
hopefully,
really.
yeah,
I
indeed,
receive
anyone's pocket.
from no political action committee, from no lobbyists, from no special interest groups, no PACs or super PACs, none. And that's why, grassroots campaigns are hard, because that's what you're up against. But I think we've seen in that when you put those people in office, their priorities become appeasing their master, who is not us.
Indeed. Well, sir, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, thank you once again for your
Thank you.
time, sharing your story, and appreciate it so much. God bless.
All right. You have a great day.